So I'm Dan Donnelly. They pitched me a softball, authority and accountability. Yeah, that's awesome. So we're in this series, First Sunday Foundations, the first Sunday of every month. We're putting another brick in the wall here, our ninth one. Doing foundational. Here's one of the books here. So this is a guide based on this aspect of the Bible, written by Larry Kreider, who's the main leader of our family of churches. And just as a plug for the Dove School, if you go into the Dove School, you read through all of these books. I want to just say a quick, small but very important caveat as I deal with a subject, and we're talking about submission to authority, that I wanted to say this doesn't include abuse. So if you're in an abusive situation, please talk to the elders of the church. So we're not, that is a side issue, and so I just wanted to say that. Another small caveat, for me, if you read the newsletter, this is something that I'm working on in process. Sometimes I might say, I haven't arrived, but I've left. So I feel like over time, God has helped me to understand this better. But if there was a 12-step program for recovering rebels, I would have joined it. So there was a captain on his ship, and he looked out, and through the haze, he could see some lights. So he went to a signal man. He said, "Send a message to that boat. Tell it to move 10 degrees south." So the signal man signals the other ship. And then they get a signal back, and it says, the message was, "You move 10 degrees north." And so the captain's he's kind of angry. And he says, "Tell him to move 10 degrees south, the captain." So the signal man sends that message, and then they get another one back. It says, "You move 10 degrees north from Seaman Third Class Jones." So now he's really mad. He's like, this guy's trying to be funny with me here. And so he says, "Okay, I know how to strike fear in his heart. Tell him, move 10 degrees south, the destroyer." So the signal man sends that, and he gets back a message, "Move 10 degrees north, the lighthouse." Okay? So I really like this. It's a common illustration. I heard it from Chuck Swindoll. I really like it because it kind of, I think, has many aspects of this topic kind of in there. I can say that as a ship captain, I'd say generally don't we like to kind of navigate our own course? Don't we like to pick and choose where we go? I know I do. Who here likes to be told what to do? Marty in the back, only one. Oh, okay. Emily. Generally, we don't like to be told what to do. We like to pick our own course. I can say for me personally, I've run a few ships into lighthouses, though, at the same time. And God's always there trying to keep us off the rocks. Can we get that first slide? So I wanted to talk about Korah's rebellion briefly. In the Bible, that's in Numbers 16. So Moses is leading. He is leading the people of Israel out on a journey to the promised land, but they have to go through desert to get there. It's supposed to take a number of weeks. Here it is a year later. 2 million people, livestock. Moses' siblings have been arguing with him and trying to take over his authority. They're also mad at him because they don't like his foreign wife. So he's having all kinds of problems. He looks like a really bad leader. So there's one of the leaders, his cousin Korah, who says he's offended that he's not able to be in the priestly class, and he thinks that he can hear from God too. So he goes up to Moses and starts talking to him and starts to grumble to other people. And then pretty soon, the grumbling crew has grown to 3. And then it grows to hundreds. And finally, in a showdown, Moses gets a message from God, and he says, okay, everybody get away from the rebels and their tents. And the earth opens up, and Korah and all of his rebels are swallowed up. So that's the tough one. It's a great example of rebellion in the Bible, and the Bible is chock full of rebels. Can you all think of any other rebels in the Bible? Just shout one out. Say them louder. Cain, thank you. Awesome. Yes, he was a rebel. Any other ones? Samson. Yep. Balaam, Saul, Judas. We could just fill up pages. So God, he sets up and he establishes all authority, and God hates rebellion. I'm going to kind of talk plainly here today. So God hates rebellion. Even in 1 Samuel 15, as it relates to Saul, he equates rebellion with what? Witchcraft, right? Divination or witchcraft. So it's pretty serious. At the same time, I can say in my own life, at times I thought, much like Korah, that I was actually doing the will of God by trying to correct a leader. And that never ended well. And I've been in leadership for 19 years, and at times people have come and I'm open to counsel, but at times I've dealt with rebels. It's been very unpleasant. But, this is Old Testament. Can we get the picture up here, Ashley? All right. So here are the rebels. Okay, yeah, bad day. But, we can say, oh, that's Old Testament, right? God was using a harder hand in the Old Testament times. It's not that God changed. It was a worse covenant, and so they experienced more of his wrath. But where do we see it in the New Testament? Well, don't we revere Paul? Paul's amazing. When we read his letters, we think, oh my gosh, super Christian. Sometimes I think he's just right under Jesus, a long way under Jesus, but he's really up there. But if you think about his letters, he's always dealing with rebels. Here he is, he knows so much. Peter in his letter says when you read Paul's stuff, it's some of it's so hard to understand because he just knows so much about God. It's unbelievable. And yet he's constantly having to go, hey, remember I'm an apostle, and these guys are fakes. Don't follow them. So even in the New Testament, it's always there. So that brings us kind of to the S word, submission. So we define submission. One way to define submission is submit means to yield, stand under, defer to the opinion or authority of another. So most of us do not naturally like that. I think it's something based on the fall. I think that we have rebel hearts. That's just kind of our default setting when we start out. Sometimes we think, if I just had a good leader, then it would be easy and I wouldn't rebel. But actually, biblically, that's kind of suspect. If you think of Satan, he had everything, and what better leader could you have than God? He's perfect. And yet, what did he do? He said, I think I can take him out. I think I can take him down. I think I can take his place. So there's that rebel part inside of us. So how do we avoid rebellion? Sometimes we can fall into it or be deceived, but how are we going to avoid it? We need to be inspectors of culture. So we don't want to blindly consume, as Americans, we don't want to blindly consume American culture. In Romans 12:2, it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So we don't want to be conformed to the thinking of the culture. As Americans, think of how we were founded. I've taught history, I've taught American history. And sometimes when you look at the rebellion and the revolution, I've had in a Christian school, sometimes we ask the question, was this godly what they did or what our founding fathers did? And I think you can make a really good case for no. They were in rebellion and it probably wasn't pleasing to God, although obviously he's blessed our country fabulously. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we were kind of raised by rebels. That's kind of in our DNA. We're freedom-loving people. I can think of, for me, I grew up, I was born in 66. I just turned 53. And I listened to a lot of classic rock growing up. And I just think now when I listen to it on the radio, I start listening to the words and I think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was bathing in this. It was oh my goodness, this is nasty stuff. And it's so much of it is based on rebellion. For people that are a little older than me, think of Sinatra. I did it my way, right? There's a lot of people, unfortunately, that could have been singing that on the way to hell. That's not a way to align with God. I watched a lot of movies. I love movies. Who watched spaghetti westerns like Clint Eastwood? The Man with No Name. So he's not a law enforcement guy. He's not wearing a badge. He's on his horse. He's just riding around. He's just doing whatever he wants. I'm I want to be that guy. It's going around shooting people and stuff. This is the stuff that we're consuming. Or Rambo, Johnny Rambo. So, what's he going to do? Somebody offends him or hurts him or wrongs him, and he's going to shoot up the town and declare a little war. Even when you see really great teamwork in some of these caper movies, you got the getaway man and the safecracker and all that kind of stuff. It's beautiful teamwork. But beautiful teamwork to break the law, Wow, great, criminal activity. We love it. Oh, yeah. So getting back to the gospel, is the gospel anti-freedom? It's not. It's not. Why? We're supposed to submit, but we're called to do it freely. We're free to choose. Paul's a great example. He's on the road to Damascus. He has this experience. He was going to persecute people in order to do God's will. And he has this experience. And he's oh my goodness, I was actually against God. And he didn't turn me into a crispy stain. He actually wants me to serve him. And out of just the passion that he has is I can't believe the grace of this guy. Jesus. And so that impacted his life so much that he would say he's a bondservant. So basically he's saying I'm a slave as a volunteer. I volunteer to submit to him. He's amazing. 1 Peter 5 and 6, and this isn't on the slide, says, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. So the way forward, the way of the kingdom, is to humble yourself and submit to God. It's beautiful. And is God asking us to do something that he doesn't do himself? Well, no. We have a model of perfect submission. Jesus, so he's got the fullness of the deity dwelling inside of him. He was at the creation and created. He was immortal, and everything in heaven, the world was his oyster. Everything in heaven was his as an heir, and he laid it all aside and humbled himself and came down as a man in a mortal body. And so in John's gospel, there's a number of times where he's talking to disciples. In John 8:28 through 29, Jesus said, When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. The one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. Always. This is not like most of the time. It's not 6 days out of the week. It's always. Then in John 12:49 it says, for I did not speak on my own, but the Father who sent me commanded me to say all that I have spoken. So he's saying, I've submitted to God. He commands me and I say it. He says, say this. He gives me all my lines. John 14:31 says, but he, here referring to the Holy Spirit, comes so that the world may learn that I love the Father and do exactly what my Father has commanded me. Exactly. It's amazing. We have this perfect picture and example of submission. We have a perfect, it's when Philip said to Jesus, like, show me the Father, and Jesus is like, show you the Father? What do you mean, show you the Father? You've been walking with me all these years. Everything I do, the Father told me to do. Everything I say, he told me to say. Perfect. Francis Chan is a pastor I really appreciate. He has this concept of painting a picture of Jesus. I just love that idea. Like Chris was saying before, we don't just want to receive love. We want to receive love and send it out. So when we all go to our places of work and we go to Martin's or Walmart or wherever we go during the week, we should be like painting pictures of Jesus. They should be seeing like little Jesuses everywhere, all throughout the town. But how could we do that if Jesus submits and we don't submit? If we're rebels, how can we do that if we're just speaking his words, but we can't? They can't see it in us. It's just empty words. So priority one is to submit to God. So that's direct obedience. And this is an important thing. And this is where I think sometimes in church circles we can get it wrong. I'm not talking about Crossroads here necessarily, but there's this idea. I heard this from a friend. He said, when I was this age, I received Jesus as my Savior. And then later, I received him as my Lord. And Jesus can't be divided. Like you can't get a scalpel and cut him in half. There's no place in the Bible that even suggests that such a thing can be done. I understand in a way what my friend was saying. But sometimes, well, I'll put it this way. Even though he didn't recognize that Jesus was his Lord, Jesus was his Lord all along. And mine too, and yours. So in the church circle, sometimes we can get into this idea that I've heard this, it makes you cringe, but they say to like somebody in the youth or student ministry, you say, you know, you're just going to rebel. You're just going to rebel for a while, and then maybe in your 30s, you're going to settle down and you're going to be able to really get this thing down. And I really appreciate Emily and Nick, and I know that's not what you're doing here, or Mitchell and Hannah. This is not your heart or what's happening here, and I really appreciate that. If you think of it, Christian equals Christ follower. Okay, it's not just somebody that made a decision. If you're a Christian, you're a Christ follower. So that's all. He's our Lord. I have to say, and I say this, and I think I'm saying it strongly at the same time, that I wish that I could go back to when I was growing up in church and really have grasped this. I think I'm just a slow learner. I'm not faulting my church or my pastors or whatever. There's so many aspects of the faith that are like bricks here that I did not really understand. I didn't really understand how pivotal it is that this is a faith, that it's going to require us to step out and do things that are uncomfortable, or that we may not have feel like it's all our ducks are in a row, that we're going to need to submit, that it's not all about us and our personal desires. Submission is important. Growing up, I'm one of 5 kids. So I had a dad that was kind of an old school dad. He still is to this day. He's still living. And he's a big man. I've maybe described him here maybe once before. So he was a football player. He even played a little bit of pro football, but he is giant. So he was about 6'4" and over 300 pounds. He was a former defensive lineman. And as a kid, looking up to him, it was like having Shrek for a dad, except he was Irish and had a red face instead of green. That's how I usually describe him. But he was very commanding. So he would say, "I need you to go rake the leaves." But sometimes he wouldn't just let you rake the leaves. He would sit down on a chair and he'd go, "You missed some." And things like that. And to me as a kid, I was like, okay, I'm doing this stuff. I'm raking on the outside. On the inside, I'm burying you in the backyard. Okay? I'm just trying to be real here. So sometimes we can submit, but our hearts are elsewhere. Later on, as I've grown and Christ has moved in my life, and I think I've matured some, I described this at one other place I know with my sons, where they were asked by my father when we were on a visit that he wanted them to go along the sidewalks with the tool where it spins and you can cut the thing off and make it look nice. And they'd done landscape work and they're like, "That's stupid. Just give me a weed whacker. I can just do it like I normally do it." Which I understand, but I try to say, no, please. Just do it how he wants it. Because it was like in my heart, what's in my heart is like, it'll be a message of love to him. He'll know that we love him if we do it just how he wants. So I think that's how we're supposed to submit to God. Just to please him. Just to touch his heart. He's worth it. Judges 21:25 says, "In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit." Okay, so that's kind of back in the Korah days, right? But Proverbs 9:10, the beginning of the verse, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Our country has lost the presence of God. I think part of the reason we have this famine of the presence of God is because we've lost the fear of God. And I know that, and I've even said this myself, oh, you know what, in the New Testament, fear of God, that just means reverent respect. And sometimes it does, but a lot of times if you translate it, it means holy terror. So I think that God is loving. Jesus has reconciled us back to him. We sit in his lap and he's our daddy. At the same time, he's not our peer. He deserves, if he asks us to submit, we should do it. This is by the world, this is considered a fool's errand. What does the world think about submission? It's stupid, it's demeaning, humiliating, and outdated. We could probably go on and on with other negative adjectives here. 1 Corinthians 1:27 says, "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." So we are supposed to look different. We're supposed to be doing some things that look crazy and foolish and stupid, but we're supposed to be a peculiar people that's different, that's going to stick out, and people are going to go, what is going on with these people? They should think we're a little bit crazy, I think. So now getting into the realms, this series, I've seen preachers that will preach 4 or 5 sermons on this, so it's kind of a crazy idea to even be doing this. But what are the realms we're supposed to submit? Family, marriage, church, government, workplace, pretty much everywhere. So God's got a plan, and he asks us to submit to our leaders in these realms, and he establishes the leaders. So he establishes them. If we rebel against them, we're rebelling against him. So it's good news, bad news, depending on what we choose. Children should obey their parents. I don't think that's very controversial. In marriage, wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. So that says it in Ephesians, Colossians, and 1 Timothy. So when God says something 3 times, we should pay attention. At the same time, what I love about God is, one thing, when Paul taught that, it was very controversial. But it wasn't controversial because of women submitting. That was just assumed. Women, at that time, culturally, this is not God, but culture, they thought women were like cattle or possessions, basically. So that submit part wasn't controversial, but the idea that a man should humble himself and love his wife sacrificially, like Christ loved the church, that was pretty radical. They were like, whoa, what are you talking about? You mean my prayers could be hindered because of the way I'm treating her? Are you kidding me? So that was very countercultural. Of course, today, the part about women submitting is countercultural and offensive. And I love God in that he will tell children to submit, but he will tell parents not to exasperate their children. Or how hard is it for a wife to submit to her husband who's sacrificially loving her and laying down his life for her? Not very hard. Sometimes it's difficult in work situations. I had a family member that came home and told me, my boss, we were in this meeting, and my boss cursed us all out. It was bleep, 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 bleep. You better make your number, bleep, bleep. And to me, I was really kind of in the flesh. You know, the old man started rising up, and I started to think, I think I'm going to take care of this. You know, and then I started thinking, no, that's stupid. And I started thinking about this boss, and I started thinking, this person is obviously afraid. They're probably afraid of making their performance number, and they're not the best boss, I'll say. But what we should start doing is praying for this guy. And so that's what we decided to do. And we started praying for the person, and no more cursing out. And they got better as a boss, and they were receptive to my family member. In the end, it was really amazing what God did with this person. So it ended up being a really good and positive, productive working relationship. So those are some of the things that can only happen when we submit. Government. I'm trying to think of the one thing I want to say. Additional thing. Government. I'm just going to say flat out, I've never yet met somebody that was really enthusiastic about President Obama, but is also equally enthusiastic about President Trump. Okay, I've never met anybody that was like both. We're called, in our country, it's beautiful that we can, the people in government are basically elected by us, and so we get to express our opinions and vote for people that match our values. At the same time, we're called to pray for whoever's in office. Whoever gets in is our person, and we need to pray for them and not curse them. So if Daniel can do it with Nebuchadnezzar, we can do it with President Obama or President Trump. And that's God's way. All right, a couple of exceptions here, getting down to my 7th point here. Are there some exceptions? Yes, there are some biblical exceptions. If the leader is trying to get you to do something evil against God, we're called to resist. The Hebrew midwives defied Pharaoh. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't bow down to the chocolate bunny. Rahab didn't tell them where the spies were. So we're supposed to resist. Accountability. So in Romans 15:14, Paul is writing, he says, I myself am convinced, my brothers and sisters, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with knowledge, and competent to instruct one another. So we're competent to instruct each other, and we're supposed to be in community with each other. So how do we deal with temptations? Well, tell a friend I'm struggling with this. They'll pray for you. Or say, I tripped up, I'm struggling, I'm losing here. Blind spots. This is something I love. I love our Thursday night small group, but this happens at probably almost every small group out there. Occasionally, people will say, hey, I think you might be missing it here. I think you can't see something, and I'm here, and I love you. We love you, so we want to help you see this. And people are able to speak into things into our lives that we can't see. That's accountability. Are you accountable to anybody in Christian community? Have you? All of us, each one of us, should be accountable to somebody. Somebody should be able to speak into our lives. Even Pastor Bobby and Wanda, they've got Ron Meyer. And then Ron Meyer and the leaders of our family of churches, they have a board of people that can speak into them. So you always want to have somebody who can come alongside of you and correct you. It's a beautiful thing the way God set things up. What's the fruit of that? To me, it's peace. That's just from me. That's how I see it. Is I get peace that I have people watching out for me. So what's God up to in your life that relates to authority? Can I ask you some questions, perhaps, as one of the recovering rebels, a gray-bearded recovering rebel? Is God perhaps waiting on you to submit to authorities He's put in your life? Or maybe He's waiting for you to answer a call to be a leader. What if certain breakthroughs have gotten delayed in what God's trying to do in your life because He's waiting for you to submit, either directly to Him or through His established authorities on earth? Can He count on you and me to paint a picture of the submitted Jesus wherever we go? Or you or we, just another captain, telling the lighthouse to get out of the way? Crossroads here. There's blessings in submission and alignment. I just kind of skipped ahead there a little bit. The Bible is just chock full of promises and blessings for submission. And all those 5 realms, you could pick out many scriptures that if you submit and you obey God, He'll be so pleased that He's going to bless you. Crossroads. So what are we supposed to do here? We're supposed to believe big, belong, and build a legacy. So that's what that's our mission or our vision. That's what we're trying to do. Have you ever thought of Canadian geese? You ever pondered them? I notice them a lot. It's very meaningful to me. They stay in alignment with each other. So when they fly in that V, they get a 70% efficiency. So the ones that fly together can go 70% further than one of them can fly. They fly in the same direction together, and they stay in alignment. Sometimes leadership delegates authority as different geese fly to the front of the V. When a goose is injured or sick, typically 1 or 2 geese will remain with the injured goose on the ground till it recovers or it dies. So I think it's a good picture of the church. If we submit to our leaders, if leaders live well and live according to how God has instructed them to live and to lead, we're going to get to some great places. Now let's go back to Korah that we started with. The rebel. So the rebels that were involved in the rebellion all died. They got sucked up in the earth. But did you know, I had never made this connection before this week, that in the Psalms, it references the sons of Korah. So there were children in that clan that survived, and they learned from the lesson. They said, whoa, we are not going to be rebels like these forefathers of ours. So they wrote 11 Psalms together. So as the deer pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants for you, Lord. That's one of the things that they wrote. So God redeemed their family line and brought them into submission. So it's a great example to us.